constantly becoming more powerful and more efficient, but also cheaper and smaller than ever before. SETI pioneer Frank Drake came up with a way to organize our developing knowledge and current ignorance. SETI scientists often use what's called the Drake equation to illuminate the necessary conditions for contact and to provide a rough estimate of the number of other civilizations. The existence of other technical civilizations depends upon astronomy, how planets form, comparative planetology, biochemistry, the role of intelligence in evolution, technology, and the fate of technical civilizations. So SETI becomes a way to test our theories of the origin and evolution of the universe and the place of life within it.
There are several keys here that we want to look at as we keep Iron Mountain's report in mind. The two primary keys are that evolution is an accepted fact and ETs are now accepted at the highest levels of government. We believe that the SETI program is camouflage for what is really going on, or the contact reports that have been gotten out from the government under the Freedom of Information Act are in fact cover for the SETI program. But the two, we believe, are going to merge in the end and introduce mankind to the aliens, who are in reality demons and Satan's advanced guard. The movies that have been produced are very important. Satan plants a seed, he waters it, then he sits back and watches it grow, and then he reaps the harvest. And the harvest, of course, is the loss of millions upon millions of men. The Day the Earth Stood Still was produced many years ago, but it's a very, very important film in that it planted the seed. The Day the Earth Stood Still said that war must stop, peace must be enforced, and world government is a requirement to get all of this to happen. The message was very important. E.T., a very, very popular movie, taught us some things as well. It said that reptiles are very cute, that love is the answer, that love heals, but more importantly, that we all evolve in a different manner. You're going to find evolution at the bottom of all of these movies. And Star Wars is another one. How famous they were. Well, they're programming the human mind for certain things. One, evolution of the races, good and evil forces, a universal, eternal fight between the forces of good and evil, and more importantly, a federation of planets, a uniting of the nations, a uniting of all the planets. Mankind will evolve upwards and eventually will join in intergalactic civilization. And this is the important keynotes in every one of these movies. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a very, very important film. It bases itself on evolution. Two, that the United Nations is a central player in that movie. The U.S. military is connected to the United Nations in that movie, and that mankind will join interplanetary civilization. It starts by contact, by exchanges of the races. In other words, some of our people go there, and some of their people come here. Now, something surfaced not too long ago called Majestic 12 that dealt with government contact with aliens. A lot of people laugh at this document and think it's a hoax. Our research against the Bible would say that it is not a hoax, that this actually is legitimate and that contact has been made. Operation Majestic 12 is a top-secret research and development intelligence operation established by special classified executive order of President Truman. Now, this took place back some years ago. Very interesting, however, what Majestic 12 sets up. A rancher reported that a UFO had crashed in a remote region of New Mexico. You might have even seen this replayed on Unsolved Mysteries. They ran a series on this. A secret operation was begun to assure recovery of the wreckage of this object. Aerial reconnaissance discovered that 4 small human-like beings had ejected from the craft. All 4 were dead. News reporters were given the effective story that the object had been a weather balloon. They are discounting the UFOs to the public while they gather the evidence secretly. The biological and evolutionary, there's your key, processes responsible for their development has apparently been quite different from those in Homo sapiens. Evolution is then a proven fact insofar as the government is concerned. They have accepted evolution as an established fact. The aliens then did not evolve as we did. This is the very basis of the grand delusion. It's creation versus evolution. Evolution is essential for the grand delusion because men reject the creation of the world and people by Jesus Christ. So it's very important you understand that evolution is the keynote. The ultimate intentions of these visitors is completely unknown, the report said. But if you read the Bible, you will know they are demons, and you will know they are the advanced guard of Satan, and that they are setting up the world for its final ruin and taking of people into eternal hell. UFOs are real. There's no question about that they are real. The only question is what are they? And if you take the evidence of the scriptures, definitely we believe here at least that they are the sons of God returning just exactly as they said they would, and all the occultic literature talks about this. Now there is an area out west called Area 51, Groom Lake. There's also Tonopah. There are several areas from which Project Red Light was developed. It's a top secret testing program for alien technology for defense purposes. This is very interesting that a lot of this stuff is being leaked right at this moment. As we get into this, a congressman said, I have no comment as to what is going on in Area 51. That was Congressman Harry Reid, and he went out there to visit the area because the Air Force had made a land grab, and he went out there on behalf of his constituents to find out why. It is said that President Eisenhower signed a treaty with actual aliens in 1957. The swap was they could take our people for experimentation, and we would get technology in exchange. In other words, the aliens come to Earth, we take their technology to build our defense mechanisms. Now, a lot of people think this is ridiculous, but if you read what it says about Babylon the Great, the nation, it gets all of its technology from Satan. Satan is the one that gives them the power, and this is why the United Nations is being brought up. And this is why the United States is so deeply involved. In exchange for technology, the U.S. government agreed to allow the aliens to abduct humans for experiments. And this accounts for the large number of abductions reported all over America. This is part of the grand delusion, which has evolution at the root of it. Now you have actually two options. All of the leaks of this type of information are disinformation, where it is real and the aliens really are here. The Bible evidence would be that it is real, the aliens are here, and that they are the advanced guard for Satan. He's programming the human race for this delusion, and it's based upon evolution. The sons of God of Genesis 6 have returned, as they said they would in occult writings. And Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so would it be again. And that's when the sons of God came down. So therefore, the agenda of Iron Mountain for external threat number 2 has been and is being carried out. Scientists are even going to the UN now to find out how are we going to answer these aliens from our SETI contacts at NASA. They believe the UN should do all of this. And so you see it elevates the United Nations to power. And this is very important. It's part of the Iron Mountain agenda. It might be argued that a well-armed international police force operating under the authority of such a supernatural court could well serve this purpose. In other words, they're going to set up another threat. This is threat number 3, actually, an omnipresent, virtually omnipotent political or police force. It's an international police force, because remember, if we go into peace, we have to dissolve the nations, because war is the reason we have nations. All right, so the report then that was issued by the State Department, Freedom from War, and the program was to establish a permanent international peace force within the United Nations. In other words, to deliberately bring it up. The peacekeeping capabilities of the United Nations would be sufficiently strong, and the obligations of all states under such an arrangement sufficiently far-reaching as to assure peace and a just settlement of differences in a disarmed world. They're going to use the United Nations to keep the peace. In other words, a world government, which is exactly what Daniel talked about and Jesus talked about. And it is very deadly. During stage 2, states will develop further the peacekeeping processes of the United Nations to the end that the United Nations can effectively suppress any threat or use of force by anyone, and that would include the American people. It's going to be omnipresent, and it's going to be omnipotent in its ability to handle. And this is what Revelation says, who can make war with the beast? Remember that the U.S. and Russia are to have their internal or militaries turned over to the United Nations in this 3-stage process, and we end up with a UN in total control of the world, a global entity, precisely as Daniel and Revelation talk about. It's and Jeremiah and Isaiah refer to it as, of course, Babylon. And this process, of course, emerges bringing out the United Nations as the final end-time global ruling entity, which the Bible refers to as the apparatus of the Antichrist, or we could say the Antichrist system. And that is why it sits in New York City, the big city. On the wall in the Security Council is a phoenix. That picture you're looking at right there is in reality the phoenix bird, which is to grow up out of the old world order. America is to be patrolled by Russian, Belgian, Irish, and Colombian and Venezuelan troops under this plan. UN troops are already on U.S. soil, and it won't be very long before these sites that you're seeing right here are going to be very commonplace in the United States. And if the American citizens resist, they are simply going to be liquidated according to the Bible. This power will come to pass. They've laid their plans well, and God has ordained it and allowed it, and is allowing it to happen. And so it's, in reality, here in America, it's a judgment against the United States. There are many books written about a United Nations peace force, so this is not anything we're making up. They come in under the UN Charter. And the last part of it, this principle of non-interfering in a nation shall not prejudice the application of enforcement measures under Chapter 7. In other words, the United Nations claims that it doesn't really want to get involved in internal national affairs, but the opposite is in reality the truth. Chapter 7 deals with action with respect to threats of the peace, breaches of the peace, or acts of aggression. And it's the Security Council itself that determines the existence of a threat, breach, or act of aggression. And it can even walk in under the threat, or it's a possibility that we might have problems. and they determine the existence of any threat to the peace. So they can come in, if they choose to, on very fragile grounds, which is exactly what they did in Somalia. Should the Security Council consider that measures provided in 41, which are more economic, I don't know exactly what word to use, but sanctions, I guess, is the best word to cover it. If that doesn't work, if economic sanctions do not work, then they can resort to military powers. And they can use whatever they have to maintain or restore international peace. Now, Psalm 2 says that the kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Where do the rulers of the world meet? They meet at the United Nations, and this is where they take their counsel together. And the United Nations is, according to the Bible, anti-Christ, anti-God to its very core. It is, in fact, the substitute for God and Christ on planet Earth. They intend to take it for themselves. The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and shall break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings. Now, it's a diverse kingdom. The United Nations is not a kingdom, and it's not a nation. It exists solely by treaty power, by an arrangement of nations itself. Excuse me. The United Nations is to be brought up to full global power with an army so powerful that none can fight against it. That's the entire plan, and that is exactly what the Bible talks about for the end times. It will also break into pieces the entire world, and that's done under Article 52, which deals with regionalism, which is in fact breaking the world into pieces. And this is how they do it. They actually subdivide the world into 10 regions. That came out of the Club of Rome, and here are the regions on the TV screen. Region 1, of course, is North America, and it's Region 1 by virtue of the fact that North America, and particularly the United States, is the primary power behind the United Nations, enabling this to happen. The United States itself is broken down into 10 federal regions. We have global regions, and now we have national regions. And in our country, they are simply called federal regions. And we're moving, in effect, from elected officials to appointed officials to non-elected bureaucrats who are appointed. Now, each region has different states in it, and the number of states varies with each particular region. Then each state is subdivided up into its particular regions. Many times it falls along county lines, many times it doesn't. Overlapping all of it is, of course, grids that keep getting smaller and smaller, which is the reason why thousands or millions, actually, of Americans are getting address changes. They're going under the United Nations grid system, which divides the world into tiny pieces, which is exactly what Daniel said. They can get it right down to your house number. In fact, they can get it down to about 10 square yards of turf.
Recently, NASA's Landsat 4 satellite, shown here just before its trip into space, was launched from the Western Test Range by a Delta rocket. This Landsat is the fourth in a series of NASA spacecraft designed to continuously collect accurate information on Earth's resources. More than 100 nations will make use of the information gathered by Landsat 4 in land use planning, mineral exploration, and agriculture. Landsat project scientist Dr. Vincent Solomonson described a new instrument on the satellite called the Thematic Mapper.
In urban planning, the Thematic Mapper will be very effective. Features that were blurred or hazy over cities as viewed by the multispectral scanner on Landsats 1 through 3 will be seen much more clearly from the Thematic Mapper, and as a result, urban planners will be able to manage and monitor the spread of the urban sprawl into the surrounding countryside.
The major receiving and processing facility for Landsat data is located at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. After completing its 3-year mission, Landsat 4 is designed to be retrieved by the space shuttle.
Okay, standing by for up telemetry command reset.
So what we have are 10 federal regions. We have 10 federal regional councils, which are miniature Washingtons, in each federal capital. We're being regionalized, and pretty soon there won't be any such thing as counties or states. So what we're doing is we're going from county and state control to total federal control, and then the federal government's losing its control to the United Nations. This is globalism. This leads to the federalization of our police or the security forces within the United States. And this is really in total violation of the constitutional implications, but they're not paying any attention to the Constitution. The internal security forces are not your peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping troops. The peacekeeping troops are there to put down actual revolutions and wars. The internal security forces are there more for crime control and the rounding up of people. Predominantly, the MJTF police will be the national police force. And this is George Bush and Clinton and the rest of them have continuously pushed this arms control treaty because they have to disarm us in order to make this thing work. If you will recall, we discussed that in the constitutional crisis. The MJTF police means multi-jurisdictional task force police, and it removes all citizens from local, county, and state protections that you had under the law. And they're just abolishing all of this. And the MJTF police mission, we believe, is the house-to-house search and seizure of people. It's made up of National Guard units, state and local police, converts street gangs as needed into deputized police. House-to-house search and seizure, separation and categorization of men, women, and children as prisoners in large areas. Now you have to understand that in order to liquidate the millions of people that Jesus Christ says are going to be liquidated, they have to plan this out long before it happens. 1965, they started the Office of Law Enforcement Assistance. Then came in 1968 the Omnibus Crime Control Act, which converted the OLEA to the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. They called, in turn, in 1971 for a regionalized police force. In 1971, an advisory commission on intergovernmental relations issued a pamphlet called M67, which called for a special multi-county and interstate police force. In other words, the merging of all police forces into one federal group. The LEAA in 1973 made calls for the elimination by merger of small police forces. This is exactly what Germany did under Hitler. All dictatorships have two common characteristics: general confiscation of guns in order to prevent internal rebellion, and the establishment of a national police force to enforce the edicts of the dictator. We are following Nazi Germany almost to the exact letter. Carter issued an executive order 12-148, and he established the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA. FEMA absorbed the LEAA and became the primary control organization for internal security of the United States in an emergency. They're gearing this thing towards an emergency. That emergency is going to be World War III, and it ushers in this whole system. FEMA has many interesting programs: Rex 82 Bravo, Rex 84 Alpha, Helix 2, Rex Alpha, Night Train, Cable Splicer, Garden Plot. These are all martial law training exercises. The plan is to bring America under martial law. We believe they know the American people would never accept this system except an external emergency were given. The UN system, remember, is a martial law military system. Under the executive orders of FEMA, mandatory registration of all people, including babies and children in the United States, at the United States Post Office. They have boxes in them. We already know about it. They're marked for emergency use only. The primary one here to look at is 11,000, seizure of all civilians and work brigades, which is in reality slavery, and includes the rights to split up families as well. In essence, what will happen in America is going to be worse than the communist revolution in Russia. This plan provides the basis for the deployment and employment of military resources, including National Guard personnel, for civilian disturbances. So Iron Mountain external threat number 3 has been and is now being implemented. An omnipotent police force. Next on the list is the space program as an economic substitute for war. It is the development of a long-range sequence of space research projects with largely unattainable goals. It's a nearest modern equivalent yet devised to pyramid building and similar ritualistic enterprises of ancient societies.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
Everything associated with the Saturn V was huge. The rocket itself, the building where it was assembled, and the crawler transporter that carried it to the launch pad. The fully loaded Apollo Saturn V was 363 feet tall. Its main engines alone generated 160 million horsepower, and its fuel pumps pushed fuel to the engines with the force of 30 diesel locomotives. As Saturn V lifted off Launch Complex 39 for the first time, it weighed more than 2,800 tons.
Engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program.
Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
Calling you on the high gain. How do you read, over?
Roger, loud and clear on the high gain.
Eagle, you're looking great. Coming up 9 minutes.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Altitude 4,200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds forward, just. Hey. Contact light. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Across the country and around the world, the Apollo 11 crew were welcomed back as heroes. Before Project Apollo ended, 6 additional flights to the moon were made, and all but one were highly successful. Then ASTP, Apollo-Soyuz Test Project, a joint endeavor between the Soviet Union and the United States. The mission called for a mutual docking and crew exchange to develop the necessary equipment for international space rescues. We looked back at planet Earth with Landsat remote sensing satellites. Crops, forests, pollution, all can be photographed in great detail to help us better manage our Earth's resources. As of now, 2/3 of the planets in our solar system have been explored, and by the end of this decade, we will have explored most of the rest, including Uranus and Neptune. Space Shuttle 5, the first operational flight. 2 commercial communications satellites were hauled into orbit, one for satellite business systems and one for Telesat of Canada. Their deployment was a complete success.
If you got it, you don't have it, obviously.
I got it.
Space Shuttle 6 was the second operational mission and Flight 1 for Challenger, this country's newest spacecraft. After launching a 5,000-pound tracking and data relay satellite from the payload bay, mission specialist astronauts Story Musgrave and Donald Peterson became the first Americans in 9 years to walk in space. Practice needed for satellite repair work.
Due for my massive article.
Historically, the space program has proceeded in a building block fashion. And toward that end, NASA has begun looking at the next logical step, a possible future space station, a permanent presence in space. The station would serve as a scientific and technological laboratory, as well as an operations base from which satellites could be serviced and large structures assembled. One of the highest priorities is to develop a clear understanding of a station's proper role in the total space program, so that if and when it is proposed for development, the station will be a truly significant national asset, one that would ensure continued American preeminence in space.
The space program in general and the shuttle program in particular have gone a long way to help our country recapture its spirit of vitality and confidence. The pioneer spirit still flourishes in America. In the future, as in the past, our freedom, independence, and national well-being will be tied to new achievements, new discoveries, and pushing back new frontiers. We must look aggressively to the future by demonstrating the potential of the shuttle and establishing a more permanent presence in space.
Even when ratified, the INF Treaty will not totally eliminate the nuclear threat to Eurasia. The vast nuclear arsenal possessed by the USSR and the variety of delivery systems available still present a significant threat.
The organization of fail-safe inspection machinery could well be ritualized in a manner similar to that of established military processes. Inspection teams might be very like armies, and their technical equipment might be very like weapons. Inflating the inspection budget. In other words, what they want to do is they want to expand this. So what do we have? The INF Treaty, where it says inspection machinery could well be ritualized, according to Iron Mountain. Inspection teams might be very armies. And that's exactly what has happened. We have a great ritual of disarmament. It's very interesting what you find when you start digging into the INF treaty hearings. Limited test ban. Let's take a look at all the treaties. Limited test ban, 1963. Non-proliferation, 1968. The ABM Treaty, 1972. The SALT I, the SALT II, the IMF Treaty. Very long, drawn-out process. And this is exactly what Iron Mountain recommended be done. It is one of the most important elements of the INF Treaty is the President establishes in this area operating on-site inspection. One layer of the regime, it says on the last sentence, builds upon another. And the whole thing becomes elongated, and it actually becomes a monster in and of itself. The data exchanges required are really immense, and so it requires an elaborate governmental system in order to accommodate all of this. And so Iron Mountain recommendation number 2 has definitely been implemented. The second one is the universal health care was a recommendation of Iron Mountain. Universal health care for all. It's an economic substitute for the war economy. It's very interesting how all of this works. Health, drastic expansion of medical research, education and training facilities, hospital and clinic construction, the general objective of complete government guaranteed health care for all. That's exactly what Clinton has introduced to the American people. He announced a universal health care and mandatory insurance program. And so they're putting everything in place exactly as Iron Mountain told them to do. It's universal, and you cannot exempt yourself from it, and it is causing a lot of trouble around the nation. But the arguments are not going to be on that basis. What is going to happen is we're going to be issued eventually a global identification card, and that is the purpose of this whole thing. The medical card has only one purpose, that's to get the foot in the door for the MARC system. Iron Mountain's third recommendation is being implemented. Iron Mountain Economic Substitute number 4, a new educational system to bring in globalism. Under the United Nations, UNESCO, Congressional Record, The Great Conspiracy to Destroy the United States, Education for Freedom and World Understanding. You see, all of this is designed to bring us into a world system, a global system, under the control of the United Nations. The second manifesto of the U.S. Office of Education, the implementation of the program of surrender through education. In other words, they destroy Americans' national pride and put us under the United Nations. And the NEA is leading in this. They even say it themselves, teaching about globalism and the world system. They say enduring peace cannot be attained until the nation states surrender to a world organization. This was found out during the Reese Committee hearings in Congress. Putting the evidence together, we conclude the NEA has been an important element in the tax-exempt world to indoctrinate American youth with internationalism, which is synonymous with a lot of communist, illuminist, whatever you want to call it. The Iron Mountain agenda is being carried out. Outcome-based education, the developing of leaders for restructuring the schools, change agents. Parents are beginning to get upset, but they are not putting it together. American 2000, a national strategy to change every nation, every family. Everything is going down exactly as Iron Mountain said it should. Global education is nothing more than a promotion of the United Nations. and to destroy the Constitution of the United States, to bring us out from the Constitution and to merge us into the UN. That's what they're going to do. To improve learning and teaching by providing a national framework for educational reform, to promote research, consensus building, and systematic changes needed to ensure, you see, everything has to be changed. Guess what the changes all lead to? And guess who's behind it? If you look, Robert Mueller, former UN Secretary General to the UN, member of the Planetary Citizens, wrote the Global Core curriculum. Marilyn Ferguson, the Aquarian Conspiracy, New Age. This is all being integrated into the educational system of America. And it's called America 2000. And it is extremely subversive. The national and international power play for education. It's going to go through because God has decreed it will go through. And UNESCO is behind it. Gorbachev, we parted with the old world, rejecting it once and for all. We are moving towards a new world, the world of communism. We shall never depart from it. Books are on the market explaining all of this. We don't have time in this video to get into it. But Iron Mountain Recommendation 4 is being implemented. Iron Mountain Sociological Substitute for War, Slavery. Another possible surrogate for the control of potential enemies of society is the reintroduction in some form consistent with modern technology and political processes of slavery for the control of potential enemies of a society. Anyone that does not agree with the New World Order is an enemy of society and is therefore subject to slavery. Detention centers and concentration camps, work camps, are associated with forced labor, which is in reality slavery. Seizure under the executive orders of all civilians in work brigades, that's forced labor, that's slavery, which includes the rights to split up families. There are concentration camps, detention centers, all over the United States set up under FEMA, under Rex 84, and there are presently, to the last count we had, 130 such facilities in the United States of America. In Arizona, you'll see, for example, some there. We've got one here in Wisconsin. Concentration camps for U.S. citizens, the MJTF police to conduct house and house search and seizure and separation and categorization of men, women, and children and babies, categorization and transfer to detention facilities and the running of detention facilities. Iron Mountain Slavery recommendation number 2 is mandatory service, a form of universal service, turned to some variant form of the Peace Corps or the Job Corps. It is entirely possible that the development of a sophisticated form of slavery may be an absolute prerequisite for social control in a world of peace. Now, this is just incredible when you really stop and look at what they're actually saying in relationship to biblical prophecies. Remember, Jesus said they're going to round you up and kill you. President Clinton has authorized boot camps for young offenders. Is this the beginning of a larger scale for social reorientation like the communists do? America 2000, the national plan that's going into our schools, requires mandatory community service. There are calls going out all the time. Bush and Clinton have called for mandatory community service for all youth, up to, say, 2 years, mandatory service. You can serve in the service or some other place, but you are going to serve. So the substitute for war is being implemented. Iron Mountain Sociological Substitute for War number 2 is called blood games. Game theorists have suggested in other contexts the development of blood games for the effective control of individual aggressive impulses. More realistically, such a ritual might be socialized in the manner of the Spanish Inquisition and the less formal witch trials of other periods for the purposes of social purification, state security, or other rationale both acceptable and credible to post-war societies. Inquisitions, witch trials for the purpose of social purification, state security, which is the key one. Such a ritual might be socialized. In other words, they make it into a big social event, like the Inquisitions were. We saw part of that beginning to unravel when we watched the Branch Davidian invasion and subsequent massacre of David Koresh and his group. A lot went down at Waco that very few Christians understand. David Koresh, the Branch Davidians, were demonized by the national media, first of all. They were tried, judged, and executed in a social ritual in total violation of every right guaranteed under state and federal constitutions. The Waco massacre followed all points of ritualized killing. They were a cult. It was for social purification, and therefore they deserved what they got. Their compound was raided by federal assault groups when in fact there was no evidence of any crime having been committed.
Yesterday's action ended in a horrible human tragedy. Mr. Koresh's response to the demands for his surrender by federal agents was to destroy himself and murder the children who were his captives, as well as all the other people who were there who did not survive. He killed those he controlled, and he bears ultimate responsibility for the carnage that ensued.
In the papers before I was going to go to court. They called me the white supremacist and all that.
It's victims of demonization that we all are victims of. When the federal government decides it is going to prosecute somebody, they sort of demonize them.
began to ring out.
Well, do you want to give your federal agents that leeway to just say, when they kill American citizens, that things just went wrong? We just have a mother here dead, we have a little boy dead, and that just things went wrong.
During the Weaver trial, it was admitted by federal agents that they had been ordered to kill the Weavers regardless of any threat family members posed to government personnel. Now I want you to think about how serious that is. What was the charge against Vicki Weaver? What crime against the state had she committed that warranted her execution by the federal government? Indeed, she was not charged with any crime whatsoever, yet the U.S. government ordered her shot on sight, a virtual killing. It was murder in the first degree. It is cold-blooded, ritualistic, social purification because the Weavers held a viewpoint not politically correct. The Weaver case, along with the Branch Davidians, proves we are in the middle of the final battle for the Constitution of the United States. There are many, many enemies within America that want to get rid of our Constitution and destroy our rights. The war has now shifted from a paper and legal war to an overt shooting war, and we feel it's going to get far worse. They came against this thing to see what the reaction of the American people would be, and they found out that the American people cheered them on. So we are ready for a complete takeover. Spotlight put out a small publication on FEMA in case of emergency. Executive orders, Blueprint for Dictatorship, also is one of their publications. Now, an executive order is issued by the President of the United States. It does not go through the Senate or the Congress. He merely issues it. It's put in a federal register, and within 30 days it has full effect of law, and nobody passes upon it. Now, that's fine, and he has some rights to do that, but not contrary to the Constitution of the United States. FEMA developed national security emergency plans for the regulation of immigration, nationals of enemy countries, plans to implement laws for the control of persons entering or leaving the United States, develop intergovernmental and interagency law enforcement plans and counterterrorism programs to interdict and respond to terrorism incidents in the United States that may result in a national security emergency. To interdict and respond to terrorism incidents in the United States. Now, this is a key that they're beginning to use. Under the new Crime Control Acts, particularly under the Crime Control Bill number 8, which is now before the Congress, a protester can be charged with terrorism. And this paves the way for the government to declare all those who oppose the New World Order as terrorists, and therefore imprison them, because you will be a political dissenter. To develop law enforcement plans to respond to civil disturbances. These people know perfectly well there's going to be major disturbance when this thing finally comes in. So they want all bases covered by law. So that's their rationale. They will legally be able to do this. You don't think it's going to happen. This is exactly the executive order issued by George Bush to quell the Los Angeles riots. LA went under martial law. Very few people understand what that means, but it means, in essence, that the Constitution in Los Angeles was totally suspended. And it says in there that units and members of the armed forces of the United States and federal law enforcement officers will be used to suppress the violence. In other words, they're federalizing everything, and that's what happens under martial law, and to restore law and orders. They can also call up members of the National Guard. That's a key point. They're militarizing the nation. They're putting it under military law. If Americans do not want the New World Order and they resist, America will go under immediate martial law rather than through the staged program into a martial law system, which is what the UN is. Also included to coordinate all federal agencies assisting in the suppression of violence and the administration of justice. Martial law suspends the Constitution of the United States. The UN is to be brought up to full power, and it will rule through martial law via a three-tier military martial law system. The first one we're going to actually look at is called FinCEN, and FinCEN, from the data we can get, it's not only a financial controlling sector, but it has to do with other things. Their equipment is black, and there are reports of a multitude of black